The darkness of the cold expanse stretched endlessly in every direction. It was a place known to many travelers as the grave of light. No star dared to shine there, and no planet showed life. For thousands of years, this region of space had been empty, a forgotten corner of the galaxy. Yet one day something changed. A weak signal began to pulse through the emptiness. It was steady, rhythmic, and strange. The signal carried the ancient language of humans. Far from that lonely place, the alien salvage ship Kellion was passing through nearby systems. The Kellion belonged to the Varni, a race known for exploring dead zones in search of lost technology. They were patient, clever, and deeply curious about humans, who had vanished long ago after spreading across the stars. The Varnis respected the humans for their courage and invention. Their stories told of how humans once walked where others feared to go. On the bridge of Kellion, Captain Dren sat in his command chair. His eyes were sharp, his scales dull green from long work under artificial light. Around him, the crew moved with quiet discipline. They were used to long silence. Then suddenly the signal came alive on their scanners. It repeated every 7 seconds. Technician V turned from her console and said that the frequency was old, perhaps thousands of years. Dren ordered the signal to be traced. Hours passed as the ship followed the signal deeper into the cold expanse. The crew felt uneasy. The deeper they went, the less their instruments worked. Radiation levels dropped to almost zero, and even their long-range sensors showed nothing. It was as if space itself had stopped moving. Then through the darkness they saw it. A large metallic shape drifted ahead. It was a ship. It had no lights, no movement, and no heat signature. Yet its hull was intact. The name printed on its side was still clear in ancient letters. Solace 1. Dren stood in silence. He had heard of this name before. Solace 1 was one of the first human deep space explorers, launched hundreds of years before humans disappeared. It had been lost beyond known space. To find it here in the expanse felt like seeing a ghost. The Kellion slowed its engines and began to circle the vessel. The human ship was massive, larger than any Varnis design. It floated without motion like a stone in still water. No energy signals came from it, but the distress beacon continued to flash faintly, pulsing with impossible persistence. The Varnis crew could not understand how such a weak system had survived for so long without power. Captain Dren decided they would investigate. He ordered the ship to extend magnetic clamps and lock onto the vessel. The crew prepared their suits and equipment. Every Varnis on the team felt a mix of fear and curiosity. Exploring dead ships was never easy, but finding a human vessel was something rare, almost sacred to them. The humans were legends, after all, the first to reach the stars with fragile machines and endless hope. When the airlock finally connected, the boarding team stepped inside. The door to Solace 1 opened with a soft hiss, releasing air that smelled faintly metallic. The lights flickered once and then stayed dim. The corridors were lined with dust, yet everything seemed perfectly preserved. No signs of decay, no corrosion. It was as if time had been paused the moment the humans vanished. Technician V ran her scanner across the walls and said that the atmosphere was stable. The ship had somehow maintained its life support system. Navigator Rill pointed out markings along the walls, human writing in faded paint. None of the Varnis could read it, but the letters gave the place a strange sense of life. It was a reminder that once humans had walked here, spoken, laughed, and dreamed. As they moved deeper into the ship, they found personal quarters still locked. Some rooms had floating objects inside like notebooks and cups. It was quiet, too quiet, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. When they reached the main deck, they saw something that puzzled them even more. A control console still glowed with faint light. It flickered weakly, showing fragments of data that made no sense. The energy readings were impossible to trace. It was not powered by any known source. Dren ordered his team to be cautious. They connected a portable energy unit to the ship's main line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's lights came on slowly, one section at a time like an awakening creature. The corridors glowed pale white. A soft voice echoed through the speakers, speaking in the human tongue. None of the Varnis understood the words, but the tone was calm, almost welcoming. Then the voice stopped and the lights dimmed again. Further exploration brought them to a large chamber deep inside the ship. At its center stood several cryopods. Most were empty or broken, but one remained active. Frost covered its surface, and inside lay a human figure. The being was motionless but alive. The readings showed stable heartbeat and brain activity. The crew stared in disbelief. A living human here after centuries. V looked at the readings again and said the pod had been running for more than 400 years. The power cell was almost gone, yet still working just enough to sustain life. Dren stood in front of the pod and studied the human's face. It was calm, peaceful, and showed no signs of age. He felt something he could not explain, a quiet respect mixed with unease. What was this person doing here, alone in a ship where no life should exist? He gave the order to transfer the pod to the Kellyan. They would study it safely in their medical bay. The crew began to disconnect it from the old systems carefully. As they did, the lights of Solace 1 flickered violently. The deck trembled slightly. The ship's voice returned, this time louder and sharper. The words repeated again and again in the same human language. V translated a few words through their database. The message said, "Mission incomplete. Access denied." Captain Dren felt a chill run down his spine. The phrase repeated once more before fading into static. The lights dimmed completely and the ship fell silent again. No systems responded after that. The pod, however, remained stable. The human inside showed no signs of waking. They carried the pod back to Kellyan and secured it in the med bay. As the clamps released the human ship, the crew looked one last time at Solace 1. It drifted quietly in the dark, its beacon still pulsing. It seemed to watch them leave like a silent guardian of its own secret. When they returned to full speed, Dren gathered the crew. He spoke firmly, reminding them that they were explorers, not thieves. Their goal was to understand, not to disturb. He said that they would study the pod, decode the data, and find out what this mission had been. The cold expanse might be lifeless, but the human vessel had proven that something had survived. Something that wanted to be found. That night, as the Kellyan sailed through the darkness, the signal from Solace 1 continued behind them. No one noticed that it had changed slightly. Instead of repeating the same sequence, it now carried a new code. It was sending coordinates that pointed toward the center of the cold expanse, a region even the Varnis charts left blank. Captain Dren sat alone in his cabin, studying the readings. He knew they had uncovered something much larger than a lost ship. He could feel it. The presence of that human pod, the impossible power source, the strange voice, all of it meant something. The humans had been gone for so long, yet their creation still moved with purpose. He looked at the star map and saw the blinking coordinates slowly shifting. The pulse of the signal matched the rhythm of a heartbeat. For the first time in his long career, Captain Dren felt something unfamiliar. It was not fear, it was anticipation. He whispered quietly that perhaps the humans had not vanished after all. Perhaps they had left behind something waiting to awaken. The cold expanse had been silent for ages, but now it was stirring. Somewhere in that endless dark, a mystery had begun to breathe again. The Varnis had found a human vessel drifting where no life persisted, and its true goal was still unknown. The human pod lay in the center of the Kellyan's medical bay, surrounded by glowing panels and cautious crew members. The room was quiet except for the steady hum of the life support machines. The figure inside the pod did not move, yet his heart continued to beat with slow precision. Captain Dren stood beside the glass, watching in silence. He had seen many strange things in his years of travel, but never a living human. V, the technician, was scanning the pod's energy source. Her readings showed that the power running through it did not match any known system. It seemed endless, cycling through itself, neither increasing nor fading. She told Dren that this technology was beyond anything the Varnis had ever seen. The captain nodded and told her to keep observing, but not to interfere with the pod's main control. He did not want to risk harming the human or activating something dangerous. Outside the medical bay, the rest of the crew whispered about their discovery. Some believed it was a miracle. Others felt fear. The human species had been gone for centuries, their worlds empty and silent. No one truly knew why they disappeared. The Varni had found ruins of their cities and their machines, but nothing alive. To see one of them sleeping in front of their eyes felt unreal. As the Kellyan continued its slow journey through the cold expanse, the crew noticed strange things happening around the ship. The lights flickered at random intervals, and systems that had never failed before began to show small errors. V reported that none of these problems were coming from the Kellyan systems. They were caused by an external influence, like an invisible signal reaching into their network. Captain Dren ordered full scans of the ship. They found a faint data link connecting their systems to the pod. Somehow, Even without direct contact, the human vessel's technology had connected itself to the Kellion. Dren was troubled by this. He called a meeting with his officers and discussed what should be done. Navigator Reel suggested disconnecting the pod entirely and sending it back into space. He said they should not risk their ship for a mystery. V disagreed. She argued that the pod might contain knowledge that could change everything they knew about the galaxy. The human could explain why his people vanished and what his ship had been doing in the expanse. Dren listened carefully, then decided that they would not abandon the discovery. The pod would stay, but they would take every precaution. The next day, V began analyzing the data taken from Solace 1. Most of the files were locked behind strange encryption. The codes seemed alive, shifting and rewriting themselves when she tried to open them. It was unlike any digital protection she had ever seen. After hours of work, she managed to unlock a small fragment. It showed a list of coordinates scattered across unknown sectors. Next to them were symbols that resembled stars, and under each one was a single word written in the human language. The translation read seeds. V brought this information to Dren. He looked at the list in silence, then ordered her to trace the coordinates. But before she could finish, the lights in the control room dimmed again, and the voice of the ship's computer stuttered. A strange sound filled the air like static mixed with breathing. Then a line of text appeared on the screen. It was written in the same human language as before. V translated quickly. It said, "Do not wake the seed before the dawn." The crew froze. No one spoke for several seconds. Dren finally said it must be an automated message from Solace 1, triggered by their access. He told everyone to stay calm and return to their duties. Still, the words stayed in their minds, repeating like a quiet warning. Later that cycle, Dren walked alone through the corridors of his ship. The windows showed nothing but darkness outside. No stars, no light. The cold expanse felt endless. He wondered why the humans had come here to a place so far from all known life. He had always believed humans were explorers, but this seemed more like exile. As he passed by the medbay again, he saw that the pod's glass was now fogged. The frost patterns on it had changed. Inside, the human's fingers twitched. V was the first to notice the movement. She ran to the captain's quarters and told him the pod was reacting. Dren rushed back, and together they watched as the frost melted away. The temperature around the pod began to rise. The life support monitor showed a rapid increase in brain activity. The human's eyes moved under his eyelids and the pulse rate grew stronger. Then slowly the pod opened with a hiss of escaping air. The man inside took a deep breath and exhaled weakly. His eyes opened, revealing calm gray color that seemed to reflect light from nowhere. He looked around slowly, confused but not afraid. Dren stepped forward and introduced himself, explaining that they were explorers who had found his ship drifting in the cold expanse. The man studied Dren with quiet interest, then spoke softly in a language none of them could understand. V activated the translator. After a few adjustments, the system began to match his speech with old human language records. The man said his name was Miran. He thanked them for rescuing him and asked what year it was. When Dren told him, Miran was silent for a moment. Then he said that he had been asleep much longer than planned. The crew asked him about his mission and about Solace 1. Miran looked at them and smiled faintly. He said he could not tell them everything yet because it was not time. When Dren pressed him, Miran said his mission was part of something called Project Dawn. Its goal was to reach lifeless regions and prepare them for rebirth. The words confused everyone. Rill asked what rebirth meant. Miran looked at the floor and said, "To bring life where there is none." Before Dren could ask more, the Kellion's alarms began to sound. The ship's engines had stopped responding. All systems were shutting down one by one. The main lights dimmed and emergency power took over. V checked the controls and found that every circuit was active, but no commands were working. It was as if something was controlling the ship from outside. Miran remained calm through it all. He looked toward the window and said quietly, "It has begun." Dren demanded to know what he meant. Miran turned to him and said that when they removed his pod from Solace 1, they had awakened the signal that was waiting for completion. It had connected to their ship, using it as a new vessel. The words frightened everyone. Dren ordered Miran to explain how to stop it, but he simply said it could not be stopped because it was never meant to harm them. Outside, the darkness around the Kellion seemed to shift. The sensors showed strange readings, energy-forming patterns that did not exist before. The stars beyond the expanse flickered faintly like distant candles. Then the ship's voice systems came online again, speaking in the same human tone that had once echoed through Solace 1. This time, it said only one sentence. Project Dawn Phase 2 initiated. V stared at her console in disbelief. Data began to flow rapidly across the screens, charts and graphs forming and vanishing. It looked like the ship was mapping something invisible. Rill shouted that their coordinates were moving even though they had not engaged any engines. The Kellyan was drifting deeper into the expanse, pulled by an unseen force. Captain Dren tried to override the movement, but nothing worked. Miran stepped forward and placed his hand on one of the control panels. Instantly, the screen stabilized. The engines powered down completely and the motion stopped. Miran said softly that they were safe for now. He told Dren that they were standing at the edge of a place that had not seen light for millions of years. A place meant to be reborn. The crew stood in silence. None of them knew what to believe. Dren looked at Miran and saw no fear in him, only purpose. The man spoke with quiet certainty, saying that humanity's final mission had never been about conquest or survival. It had been about giving something greater to the universe. When Dren asked what that was, Miran smiled faintly and said, "Hope." He then sat down, weak from awakening, and closed his eyes to rest. The room was silent except for the steady hum of power returning to normal. Dren did not know what was coming next, but he felt that their discovery had only just begun. Outside, the stars flickered again, as if something deep within the cold expanse had opened its eyes. The Kellyan floated in stillness, carrying both fear and wonder. Somewhere in the dark, the true goal of Solace 1 was starting to reveal itself. The silence inside the Kellyan felt heavier than ever. The crew moved carefully around the corridors, speaking in low voices. Every few minutes, the lights would flicker for a second, as if something unseen was breathing through the ship. Captain Dren stood on the bridge, staring at the holographic map of the cold expanse. The stars on the screen were dim, and the ship's position marker blinked in and out, unable to settle. V was running diagnostics again. She reported that all systems were functioning, yet none of the readings made sense. The navigation sensors could not detect any gravitational pull, but somehow they were being drawn toward the center of the expanse. Dren's tail moved slightly, showing his growing unease. He asked if Miran, the human, was awake. Rill replied that he was still in the med bay, sitting quietly. He had eaten some food and spoken little. When asked what he was thinking, he only said he was remembering. The crew did not know what to make of him. He was calm but distant, polite but secretive. Some of the younger crew members whispered that perhaps he was not truly human, but a construct of human machines. Dren decided to visit him again. As he entered the med bay, he found Miran sitting by the window, watching the dark space outside. His expression was thoughtful. The captain greeted him and thanked him for stabilizing the ship earlier. Miran turned and smiled slightly. He said it was not him who had stabilized the ship, but the system responding to his presence. Dren asked him what that meant. Miran looked at the glass and spoke slowly. He said that Solace 1 had been designed to travel where no living thing could survive, to the emptiest parts of space, carrying what humans called the Seed of Dawn. Its mission was to find lifeless regions and prepare them for life. It was a project started when humanity realized their time was ending. Dren listened closely. He had heard of human myths before, stories of their final journeys, but none like this, Miran continued. He said that the seeds were energy cores capable of transforming dead space into fertile systems, creating stars, planets, and the basic elements for growth. But the project had never been completed. Something had stopped it before it reached the final stage. Solace 1 had been one of the last ships sent out, and its task had been to find the cold expanse, the largest dead region known to exist. The captain asked what had stopped the project. Miran's voice grew quiet. He said that some humans had lost faith in their mission. They believed that creating new life beyond their reach would be dangerous. So they fought among themselves and the project was abandoned. Many ships were lost. Miran was one of the few who continued, believing that the mission still mattered. When Dren asked how he had survived for so long, Miran said that the cryopod had been designed for extended preservation. It kept his body alive and his mind partially aware. He had dreamed through centuries, waiting for someone to find him. He said softly that he always knew it would not be humans who woke him, because humans had already gone. V entered the room carrying a tablet of readings. She said the ship's sensors were picking up faint radiation waves from the direction they were drifting toward. Miran's eyes lit up at the words. He said that the seeds were awakening. Dren asked what that meant. Miran explained that once the seed detected a conscious presence near it, it would begin to activate. It was programmed to respond to life, to sense awareness and movement. Dren looked troubled. He asked if it was dangerous. Miran shook his head and said it was not made to destroy, but to create. Still, he warned that the process could not be stopped once it began. It would transform everything around it. V looked nervous. She asked if that meant their ship would be affected. Miran said that if they stayed near the center, they might witness the beginning of something beautiful. But they had to be careful not to interfere. The seed would not recognize them as friends or enemies. It would only see them as part of the environment it was shaping. Dren stood silently for a long time, thinking. Then he ordered the bridge to monitor the energy patterns closely. He told Miran that they would trust his guidance but expected honesty in return. Miran nodded and said he understood. Hours later, as the Kellyan drifted further, the sensors began to pick up visual changes. The dark void outside was not as empty anymore. Faint trails of light started to appear, like thin rivers of energy stretching across space. The crew gathered at the observation deck, staring in amazement. The light looked alive, flowing in gentle curves, weaving patterns through the darkness. Rill said it was like watching the birth of stars. The energy was pure and calm, unlike anything they had seen before. Miran joined them, standing quietly beside Dren. He said that this was the first stage. The seed was gathering matter, pulling atoms from the emptiness to form structure. It was not a weapon, he said, but a gift from a species that wanted life to never end. V asked if other seeds were still out there. Miran said yes, scattered across different galaxies. Each one had been placed in dead zones like this, waiting for contact. Some might have never been found. Others might have already awakened without anyone noticing. Dren felt a strange chill at the thought that perhaps new worlds were forming right now, born from the hands of humans who no longer existed. As the crew watched the flowing light, the ship's internal systems began to show new patterns. Data lines formed across the screen, symbols none of them could read. The translation systems failed to decode it. Miran said it was an ancient human code used to communicate with the seed. He stepped forward and placed his hand on the console. Instantly, the symbols rearranged into readable text. It said, "Life detected. Preparing Phase 2. The lights on the bridge brightened. The engines powered on without command. The ship started to move forward again, gently but steadily, as if being guided. The crew panicked, but Miran told them to stay calm. He said the seed was linking with the ship's systems, using it to navigate the creation process. The Kellyan became part of the pattern, an observer and participant at the same time. Dren wanted to know what Phase 2 meant. Miran said it was the shaping of structure, the creation of a central energy source that would become a star. They were about to witness the formation of something that had not happened naturally in this region for countless ages. Suddenly, the darkness outside shimmered. A single point of light appeared in the center of their view. It was small at first, then began to expand, glowing brighter with each passing moment. The ship's shields activated automatically, protecting them from the rising energy. The crew shielded their eyes. V reported massive radiation levels, but no harm to the ship. Miran smiled and said softly that the first son of the expanse had just been born. The crew stood in awe as the light continued to grow. Around the new sun, particles started to gather, forming rings of dust and gas. The systems recorded temperature increases and gravitational fields forming in real time. It was creation itself happening before their eyes. Dren could not speak. He felt both fear and wonder. The cold expanse, which had been lifeless forever, was changing. As the light stabilized, the ship's power returned to normal. The system stopped flashing and the movement ceased. Miran said the seed had completed its second phase. The next phase would take longer. It would require balance, time, and the presence of life. The Kellyan would remain as a guide until the seed recognized stability. V asked what would happen after that. Miran said the seed would send a final signal across the stars to mark the return of light to this region. The signal would tell the galaxy that the cold expanse was no longer dead. It would also carry a message from humanity, a message that Miran said he would share when the time came. Later, as the crew rested, Dren stood alone by the observation window. The newborn sun shone brightly, its warm glow touching the hull. He thought about Miran's words, about humans who had chosen to create rather than conquer. It changed the way he saw them. They were not gone. They had left something greater behind. In the medbay, Miran sat quietly again, eyes closed. He could feel the rhythm of the seed through the ship, a slow pulse like a heartbeat. He whispered softly that the dawn had begun, and that soon the universe would remember. The cold expanse was no longer silent. It had begun to breathe again. The Kellion floated quietly near the newly born sun. Its gentle light filled the ship's observation decks, casting soft shadows across the crew's faces. Captain Dren stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the glowing star. He could not stop thinking about what they had witnessed. A sun forming where no life had existed before. It was a miracle, yet it carried a weight of responsibility he could feel in his bones. V was working at her console, scanning the area for energy patterns. She noticed faint waves moving outward from the star, almost like signals. They were subtle, but the computers could detect them. She told Dren that the waves resembled messages, though they could not yet be read. He nodded, sensing the importance. Whatever humans had left behind, it was still trying to communicate across time and space. Miran sat in the medbay, eyes closed, feeling the pulse of the seed through the ship. He said quietly that the first phase had succeeded, and that the second phase, the awakening of structure, was stable. He could feel the rhythm of the newly forming planets, the slow swirl of gas, and the beginnings of life-supporting matter. This was what humanity had left behind, a gift that would outlast their species. Dren asked if there were more seeds. Miran opened his eyes and nodded. He said that humans had planted many seeds in forgotten parts of the galaxy. Some would never awaken without help. Others might already be active, quietly shaping their surroundings. Humans had wanted to ensure that no corner of the universe remained lifeless, even if they themselves were gone. Suddenly, V's console flashed with a strong signal. She called everyone to the bridge. The data streamed in rapidly, forming images and symbols across the holographic screens. It was coming from the new star. Miran's eyes widened. He said it was a message from Earth, encoded in a pattern the seed could understand. He explained that humans had built a final communication system that would activate when a seed began its work. The screens revealed visuals of old human cities, now long abandoned, and ships like Solace 1 traveling through space. V translated the accompanying data into simple terms. Humans had recorded their history, their dreams, and their knowledge. They had left instructions for the seeds detailing how to create stable environments, how to form planets, and how to encourage life. The seed had read this message and begun to act. Captain Dren was amazed. He had heard legends of human wisdom, but seeing it in action was different. The humans had not only explored the stars, they had planned for the future of life itself. Miran said that humans had understood the fragility of life and had wanted to leave a lasting legacy. Their goal had never been power or conquest. It had been hope. As the crew studied the data, the ship's sensors detected rapid changes in the area around the star. Dust clouds were coalescing into rings, and small clumps of matter were forming the first hints of planets. Miran explained that this was the seed working through the energy patterns. It was slow but precise. Every movement was calculated to ensure stability. Rill, the navigator, asked what would happen next. Miran said the next phase was the creation of the first atmosphere. It would take time, but the seed would draw gases from surrounding space to form a breathable environment. The planets were not complete yet, but the foundation had been laid. Soon they would have air, water, and the basic conditions necessary for life. V pointed out a faint glow on the edges of the star. She said it looked like the star was communicating with the surrounding matter. Miran nodded. The seed was not just creating planets. It was guiding them, shaping the energy flows and balancing the gravitational fields. It was a living system in its own right. Dren thought about the implications. Humanity had created something that could survive without them, a force of creation that could continue across centuries. He realized that the humans had not disappeared. They had transcended their own existence, leaving a mechanism that would continue their purpose long after their species was gone. Later, Miran led Dren and V to a small chamber aboard the Kellion that had been used for additional storage of Solace 1's data. The room was lined with panels that glowed faintly, containing information that even Miran could not fully decipher without time. He said that the humans had prepared for contingencies. If a seed failed or became lost, the data would guide others to reactivate it. Dren looked around the room, filled with awe. The humans had anticipated everything. They had thought of the lifeless voids, the risks, and the delays that could come with centuries of travel. They had made a plan that would survive technology failures, cosmic hazards, and the disappearance of their own species. It was brilliance and foresight beyond anything the Varnas could imagine. Suddenly, the ship's alarm beeped softly. A small energy wave had reached the Kellion. It was not harmful, but it carried a pattern that Miran recognized instantly. He said it was a guidance signal, a pull from another seed located farther in the expanse. It was awakening now, reacting to the presence of the newly active seed. Dren asked what that meant. Miran explained that the seeds were networked across the galaxy. When one awakened, others would follow. Life would begin in stages, spreading outward from each seed until the galaxy became more vibrant. The humans had created a system of renewal, ensuring that the universe would never be entirely empty again. V checked the readings. She said that energy flows from the new seed were increasing, forming invisible channels that connected to distant sectors. Miran smiled faintly. He said that the humans had always hoped someone would witness their work. They had intended for their creations to be seen, not just for life to return, but for knowledge to be shared with intelligent beings who could learn from it. Captain Dren realized that the mission of the Kellion had changed. They were no longer mere explorers. They had become witnesses and guides. They were participants in humanity's final legacy. He felt both honor and responsibility. Every choice they made now could influence the seed's work. As the hours passed, the crew observed the changes outside. Dust clouds swirled, forming shapes that slowly became spherical. Tiny glimmers appeared as minerals began to crystallize. The energy from the seed touched the Kellion, but instead of harming it, the ship seemed to harmonize with the flow. Even the engines and systems responded differently, running more efficiently and steadily. Miran said softly that the seed recognized compatible consciousness. The Varnas minds aboard the ship were attuned enough to be part of the process. Their awareness mattered. Dren felt a strange connection, as if he were linked to the new worlds forming beyond the ship. Night came aboard the Kellion, though it was not night in the usual sense. The glowing star illuminated the corridors with a steady golden light. Miran sat quietly watching the process. He said that humans had understood that life needed more than energy and matter. It needed patience, observation, and care. That was why the seeds worked slowly, carefully shaping every detail. V asked if the humans had planned for intelligent life to eventually arrive. Miran nodded. He said that the goal was not only to bring planets into existence, but to ensure that they could support thinking beings. The humans had hoped that one day new species would live and flourish, learning from the legacy they had left behind. As the first tiny planets began to take form, Rill asked if they would survive. Miran said they would. The seed would continue to guide them, balancing the energy and matter, preventing collapse and ensuring growth. He said that in a few centuries the planets could host oceans, vegetation, and the simplest life forms. Then over millennia, intelligent life could develop. Captain Dren stood again at the observation deck, watching the beginnings of creation. He realized that the humans had achieved something extraordinary. They had vanished from the galaxy, yet their work would continue for thousands of generations. Their final message was not one of power or dominance, but of care, patience, and hope. Finally, Miran spoke, saying that this was only the beginning. The seed would continue to expand its influence across the expanse. Other seeds would awaken in time. One day, these efforts would connect, forming a network of life that stretched across the galaxy. Humans had ensured that the darkness of the universe would never last forever. Captain Dren understood now that humanity's purpose had never been to survive alone. Their final mission had been to give life the chance to thrive everywhere, even in places thought impossible. The cold expanse was no longer dead. It had become the first sign of humanity's enduring gift, and the Kellion floated in the golden glow, witnessing the miracle, carrying the story of the past forward, and ready to play its part in the future. The Kellion drifted gently in the golden glow of the newly forming star. The warmth from the star touched the hull of the ship, and soft light reflected across the observation deck. Captain Dren stood at the window, his eyes following the slow movements of the planets forming in orbit. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of witnessing creation. It was both humbling and inspiring. Miran sat nearby, calm and composed. His hands rested on the table, and he occasionally glanced at the screens displaying the energy patterns of the seed. He said softly that the process was accelerating. The first ring of planets was now stable, and the formation of atmospheres had begun. Tiny clouds of gas spun around each planet, showing signs that they could one day support life. V adjusted the scanner settings. She reported faint signals from the distant seeds scattered across the galaxy. Each one had begun to react, sending out its own energy waves. Miran smiled faintly. He explained that the seeds were interconnected, designed to awaken in sequence. One seed would complete its cycle, and the signal would encourage others to follow. Slowly, the galaxy would begin to regain its vitality. Rill moved closer to the observation window. He asked if intelligent life would really have a chance in these new worlds. Miran nodded. He said that humans had carefully designed the seeds to create stable environments. Water, air, minerals, and energy flows would all be balanced. Life would be able to develop naturally. Some planets would remain barren, but others would slowly grow into habitable worlds. Humans had thought for centuries ahead. Captain Dren turned to Miran. He asked what the humans had hoped to achieve with all this. Miran's eyes reflected the star's light. He said that humans had understood the fragility of existence. They knew that life could vanish in a moment, but they also knew that hope and perseverance could endure. The seeds were their final message, a promise that life would continue even if humanity itself could not. The bridge crew watched in awe as the planet's shapes became clearer. One planet, slightly larger than Earth, began to form oceans. The water shimmered faintly, reflecting the light of the star. Miran explained that this was the first planet capable of supporting simple life. The others were smaller, forming rocky surfaces and dust rings. All were balanced in orbit, protected by the energy of the seed. Suddenly, the sensors detected a faint vibration in space. It was subtle yet steady. Fee said it was an energy pulse moving through the galaxy. Miran's eyes widened. He said that the first signal from another seed had arrived. Its presence indicated that its own star and planets were beginning to form. The network of seeds was awakening. Humanity's legacy was spreading faster than even he had anticipated. Captain Dren felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility. He realized that the Kellyan was not just an observer. Their presence was important. Miran explained that conscious life nearby could help stabilize the energy flows. Their awareness allowed the seeds to synchronize more efficiently. The Varnus crew had become part of the process. Without their guidance and attention, the balance might have been slower or less precise. As hours passed, the planets continued to grow. Clouds thickened, oceans expanded, and mountains began to form. The energy of the star and seed created a harmony that extended across the system. Miran said softly that humans had always believed life should have a chance to flourish everywhere. They had designed this system to ensure that even in the coldest, emptiest corners, life could return. V asked what would happen once the planets were ready. Miran said that the seeds would continue to monitor the systems. They would maintain balance until life could begin naturally. Then over centuries, plants, oceans, and weather systems would develop. The first living creatures would emerge gradually. Intelligent species might take millions of years, but the foundation was secure. Humanity had left the blueprint, and the seeds would follow it perfectly. Rill pointed to the largest planet, which now had swirling clouds over blue oceans. He asked if humans had expected anyone to see this process. Miran nodded. He said humans had hoped that one day other beings would witness their work. They wanted life to know that it had value, that the universe had not been left empty. The Varnus were the first to see it. They were the witnesses of humanity's final gift. Dren felt a deep sense of respect. He had always admired humans for their courage and curiosity, but now he understood their wisdom and foresight. They had vanished, yet their influence stretched across the galaxy. The cold expanse, once a lifeless void, was now a cradle of potential. A quiet light had returned where none had existed before. Miran stood at the observation window, hands clasped behind his back. He said that the next step was subtle but critical. The seeds would fine-tune gravitational fields, temperature patterns, and atmospheric flows. The planets were still young and fragile. A misalignment could delay the formation of life. He explained that humans had designed the seeds to be self-correcting, able to adapt and recover from disturbances. V looked at the readings in amazement. She said it was like watching nature itself at work, but with precision beyond comprehension. Miran smiled and said that humans had combined their understanding of science and intuition. They had seen what would take millennia, and built a mechanism that could achieve it in centuries. As the crew observed, another energy pulse reached the Kellyan. It came from a distant sector, signaling another seed had begun its process. Miran said that eventually, these energy pulses would spread across the galaxy, forming a network of life. Humanity had ensured that no corner of the universe would remain lifeless for long. Captain Dren asked Miran what message humanity had left for intelligent beings who might one day find this system. Miran said it was simple. We have been here. We have cared. Life is precious. Protect it, cherish it, and never give up hope. The words were quiet, but the crew felt their meaning deeply. Hours turned into cycles as the Kellyan observed the unfolding creation. Miran occasionally spoke, explaining details about the energy flows and planetary formation. Dren noticed that the crew was no longer anxious or fearful. They were calm, focused, and inspired. Witnessing creation had changed them. The cold expanse was no longer empty. It was alive in potential. The first planet with oceans developed strong currents, clouds formed consistent weather patterns, and the temperature balanced itself. Miran explained that these processes were critical for supporting life. Water must circulate, nutrients must mix, and the atmosphere must stabilize. Every detail was part of the human design, ensuring that life would have a proper foundation. V reported that the energy readings from the newly activated seeds were now forming a web across the galaxy. Miran confirmed that this was the human network at work. Life would not remain isolated. Energy and information would flow between systems, helping each seed maintain balance and stability. Humans had designed this network to be self-sustaining. It could continue without their presence, yet it carried their purpose and intent. Dren asked Miran if humans had ever imagined returning. Miran shook his head. He said humanity had accepted that their time had ended. They had built the seeds not for themselves, but for the universe. The mission was never about survival alone. It was about ensuring that life in all forms could continue. As the final hours of the cycle passed, the planets were fully formed, atmospheres stabilized, and oceans in motion. Tiny signs of life began to emerge in the simplest forms, microscopic organisms in water and dust, the first living sparks of existence. Miran smiled faintly. He said that in a few centuries these life forms would grow and evolve. Eventually, intelligent species could arise carrying the legacy of humans forward. Captain Dren looked at Miran and said that humanity had truly succeeded. They had vanished, yet they had left a gift that would last forever. Miran nodded. He said softly that humans had always believed that the best way to survive was not to cling to life themselves, but to give life a chance wherever it could thrive. The crew of the Kellyan stood silently at the observation deck, watching the gentle glow of the new star and the slowly spinning planets. They felt honored and inspired. Miran said that the cold expanse had been transformed, and soon, other empty regions would follow. Life was returning to the galaxy, and the memory of humanity would live on in every seed.